Good evening, or perhaps good morning. Good morning to some of you. I'm Jorge Camargo. I'm the Vice President of the Board of Trustees of CEBRI. CEBRI is the Brazilian Center for International Relations. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on the contribution of green hydrogen to the energy transition. This webinar was organized by CEBRI in partnership with the Australian Embassy in Brazil. So I believe for this audience that it's now clear that at least that hydrogen in general, but especially green hydrogen, will have to play a key role on our global journey towards net zero. In fact, most scenarios show that it will be virtually impossible to reach the Paris Agreement's climate targets, unless green hydrogen is developed as a fundamental part of our future global energy matrix. With this fact in mind, many countries are preparing, are promoting, are developing this new energy vector through specific strategies and roadmaps in order to take part in this huge endeavor. It will be a long and complex journey that is just starting. Australia and Brazil are two of those countries that see hydrogen not only as a key enabler to the current energy transition, but also as a huge opportunity for industrial, economic, and social development. Australia and Brazil are countries with quite distinctive competitive advantage to play in this new energy space. Australia and Brazil will certainly compete for this new green hydrogen market, but also have many opportunities to cooperate on how to develop these global markets, cooperate on how to best set policies and the most favorable and constructive regulatory framework, cooperation on how to develop the best conditions to attract investments, to promote innovation. So I understand these will be the key issues for this webinar today. Yeah? But so again, many thanks to all participants, and special thanks for our speakers today, who will be properly introduced by André Bello. André is the Low Carbon Innovation Coordinator at Petrobras, and he will conduct and moderate this event. But before handing to André, I'd like to give the floor to Grant Morrison, who is the Chargé d'Affaires of the Australian Embassy in Brazil. Grant, is with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge, and boa noite, Brazil, and good morning to everyone in Australia. On behalf of the Embassy here in Brasilia, it's a pleasure to welcome you all for this seminar on green hydrogen, energy transition and collaboration between our two countries. I'm delighted that, well, over 200 people have expressed their interest in this topic by registering for this event. I'd like to thank our co-hosts, the Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRI, and particularly our esteemed panelists, Agnes da Costa, Luis Viga, Fiona Simon, Cameron Mati, our host, Jorge Camargo, and our moderator, André Belo Oliveira. As Jorge just said, hydrogen will be a critical technology in coming years, allowing the world to transition to a clean and secure energy future, we hope. And with an abundance of renewable energy resources, Australia and Brazil should be important actors in this story. The Australian Embassy is proud to bring together this expert panel comprising government, industry, and civil society from both our countries. The panelists are all leaders in their fields and well placed to explore the enormous potential of green hydrogen for both our countries and identify opportunities for future collaboration. I hope today's seminar will be a catalyst for that collaboration, and we at the Embassy will always be available to help in whichever way we can. So thank you again. I am sure we will all find the seminar a stimulating 90 minutes And I pass over now to Andre.
Thank you for the introduction, Morrison. Before I start, I just would like to give two information. One of them is we have an interpretation tool here. In YouTube, there is a link. If you push this link, you can go to Zoom, and in the Zoom, you can choose if you want to hear in Portuguese or in English. The first part of event, we have two Brazilians. Unfortunately, I want to apologize, but Marcelo will not be here with us. He has to leave, take a flight to attend another appointment. But we will start with Agnes speaking. Let me introduce Agnes first. Agnes is the head of Special Advisory for Regulatory Affairs of the Ministry of Mines and Energy since January 2019, with a specialty in energy and mining economics. She is enthusiastic about the energy sector's role in the positive transformation of society and has extensive experience in privatization process. She is currently coordinating the modernization of electrical sector, the Permanent Commission for Analysis of Methodology and Computational, and the MME policies related to energy transition, research, development, and transition, research, development, and innovation, and hydrogen. She has been working for 16 years at Ministry of Mines and Energy in the recommendation and public policies, is a member of the career of specialists in public policy and government management since 2006, and has held the position until 2019 of Advisor, Special Advisor Program Director and Deputy Chief of Special Advisory for Economics Affairs. She holds a bachelor degree in Economic Science from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro and holds master's degree in Energy from University of São Paulo. She has experience in corporate governance, having served on board since 2014, and she is currently chairman of the Fiscal Council of Petrobras. She was a member of board of directors of CEL, CEPSA, and Norte Energia, and member of Fiscal Council of Eletrobras. Agnes, thank you for coming. Please. I have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Jorge and Grant. It's a pleasure to be here. So after this long description, you just noticed I have been working a lot with market design, working a lot with the power sector. And since 2020, started organizing our narrative in energy transition here in the Brazilian Ministry of Energy. And this is when we started looking more seriously into hydrogen as well, also because of the European Green Deal and the discussions about hydrogen in Europe. So I will make a short presentation. One moment, please, just putting here my slides. You get seated? Okay, so, let's see, so we have here in Brazil an energy research office that do all our planning studies. They are indicative studies, so it's not mandatory, but we have two kinds of studies, the one that looks 10 years ahead and the other one that looks 30 years ahead. And the most recent edition of the 10 years ahead energy planning study already has a chapter on hydrogen, because this is something that we already see in this next 10 years coming as a possible technological solution that will increasingly be incorporated in the energy sector in Brazil. But of course, we have to think about feasibility, so how to design them to get a market to work with hydrogen. Then there's this technological feasibility and economic feasibility, and several, as we already know, technological routes, some more competitive than others. But when we look into our potential, it is, we already foresee that 96% of the hydrogen to be produced in Brazil will be from renewable sources. We don't, we have chosen to speak about this clean hydrogen as a low carbon hydrogen, not locking in any specific route, because when we talk about green hydrogen, there is always this question about if it's only from electrolysis coming from renewables, or if we can count on other routes that contain biofuels, for example. So we always chose to discuss this in terms of low carbon hydrogen. And when we look into our domestic market, we have already some consumption and production for hydrogen for industrial uses, and the novelty is now how to design or how to create from scrap an industry, a market, and infrastructure for hydrogen as an energy vector for energy use, energetic use. And then we see a lot of potential in several areas as well, not only in the industry. And also what is very interesting is that we already count on several local and global players and suppliers in Brazil. So it is, when we started discussing it, it is looking to what already exists and how do we fill the gaps to enable the creation of this bigger scale industry. But it is very important to state that, on the other hand, although we have started discussing this in a more comprehensive way in 2020, there has been a lot of results here in Brazil as well in the last 20 years, mainly in programs, plans, and white papers, and also in technological development, also with capacity building, with R&D resources. And when we look then into the plans, the most recent ones, as I mentioned, we have this new 10-year energy plan with a chapter on hydrogen, but we already had the National Energy Plan looking 30 years ahead, published in 2020, already putting hydrogen as one of the promising disruptive technologies. And then in 2021, our Energy Research Office published a special report on the basis for a consolidation of a hydrogen national strategy. And based on this, in 2021, our National Council for Energy Policy published the first resolution that oriented our regulatory agencies in the power sector and in the oil, gas, and biofuel sectors to prioritize 7 themes related to energy transition for the destination of these public and publicly oriented resources. But one of the themes was hydrogen, and then the National Council for Energy Policy also established that the Ministry of Mines and Energy, together with the Ministry of Science and Technology and the Ministry of Regional Development, with the technical support of the Energy Research Office, should propose then directives for a national hydrogen program. So this was done then in 2021. And also with all this learning from the last 20 years, there are several startups in Brazil that also are becoming very prominent in this market as well. So based on this resolution from April 2021, we presented then back to CNP, the council, these directives in August 2021, and then the National Hydrogen Program was then approved and instituted in June 2022. So now we are we are designing the first 3 years working plan of the program, and this 3 years working plan will be based on the 6 axes and the governance structure approved for the program has a board of directors from representatives from several ministries, but the job and the proposition of the plans and what will be done will take place in thematic chambers. We will have 5 thematic chambers. The one concerning international cooperation will not be a thematic chamber, but because we already foresaw that international cooperation is a transversal theme that will be in all the other thematic chambers. And this will then be a locus for stakeholder participation, so that we have other inputs on how to design an actual working plan for the building of this industry and this market for hydrogen as an energy vector in Brazil in the coming years. So this is where we are now, and we have until the end of this year to present our first 3 years working plan. And the government structure already states that we have every year we have to revisit the working plan and update it for the next 3 years. So this is like a living policy that we are designing now. But on the other, but besides that, what we already see is that there is a lot of discussion taking place about the destination of funds and resources from several entities and also from the capital markets for hydrogen, for pilot projects. So there is a lot of interest in Brazil in hydrogen. And this is also because it's very promising looking into our energy mix that has such a big diversity of energy resources and also of clean energy resources. And when we look specifically into BNDES, it's our National Bank for Social and Economic Development. There are some financing lines that may sue also to hydrogen projects. And what is also very important is that everything that we are building is with strict international collaboration and discussion on this topic with bilateral and multilateral partners. So last year, Brazil participated in the United Nations High-Level Dialogue on Energy in the theme of energy transition. And there we were strongly encouraged to propose energy compacts, which are voluntary international commitments. And one of them is on hydrogen. And this voluntary commitment on hydrogen has to deal with creating or expanding the knowledge on hydrogen on 3 pillars: on R&D, on capacity building, and designing a platform where we can put all the information that we have on hydrogen in Brazil to reduce information asymmetries for the private sector, in fact, because we are discussing about a market that will depend on private investments. But there are also other initiatives in which we are participating as well with several partners. So there's really a strong interest in participating and discussing hydrogen in Brazil with international partners. And what I stated at the beginning, what is also very interesting is when we look into what the industry is already doing, we see a lot of developments and strategies dealing, coming from the private sector, from the industry, looking into the hydrogen based on biofuels in Brazil, which is something very specific to Brazil, but may be the reality for other tropical and developing countries as well. So that's why we are strongly supporting the idea that we cannot lock into routes, but think about what Jose mentioned is our shared future of low carbon emission, and the several pathways that we can pursue to get there as quick as possible at the least cost possible. And then when we looked into specifically in the power sector, there are several companies already announcing strategies and investments in hydrogen in the power sector. So also linked to renewable energy. And then coming back to green hydrogen, what we already know are these projects that are being announced in at least 3 states linked to the export of green hydrogen to Europe or in other markets. And what we are doing here in the Ministry of Mines and Energy, we are following up very close the state governments and helping them out in whatever we can, so that what they are now discussing as MOUs really become reality as soon as possible. So this is what we are doing, but we're very not surprised, but very optimistic in some ways, because when we started discussing hydrogen, we had the report from IRENA, the report from the International Energy Agency, and everybody was talking about green hydrogen becoming competitive in 2030. But when we see all this investment and all this buzz in tangible projects, then we already see that this horizon may come closer to us as we thought at the beginning. So what we can say, looking to our energy policy and energy transition policy, is that, of course, Brazil is a strong candidate, as José mentioned, to be a hydrogen producer. There is a strong commitment from the government to develop this industry, this market, and the source. We have, when we think about the infrastructure sectors in Brazil, the energy sector is the one that has the soundest regulation and business environment. And we have the technological skills and capacity, human capitals, but we are working on developing more of this human capital and this capacity building for this specific hydrogen. And with the Ministry of Education, for example, and we have to benefit from our national competitive advantages, but create new ones. And then we know, of course, that renewables are the blue chip, but we have to think about other routes as well, thinking about a transition. Because when we think about energy transition, it's not a country doing an energy transition, but several enterprises, businesses doing their energy transitions. And for example, from when we think about oil and gas, for example, they may start with gas and come with gas with CCUS, and then later directly with the green hydrogen, for example. We never know. So we have to allow them to make these choices so that they can move away from emitting sources as well. And yeah, so always look into a technological neutral framework, and look into what our existing markets are and potential markets, of course, and this is why we're here, always with wide international partnerships. So this is what I wanted to show you here very shortly, and thank you very much again for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Agnes. It's very good to hear you and see how the possibilities that we have here in Brazil. We have almost all the colors of hydrogen available, green hydrogen, maybe blue, and all of them related to sugarcane energy like ethanol and biogas. So it's very interesting to see the growing of a new industry. But let me introduce Dr. Fiona. I think the international cooperation is something very positive. And Dr. Fiona is the CEO of Australian Hydrogen Council, the peak body of Australian hydrogen industry. So Australian Hydrogen Council connect the hydrogen industry and its stakeholders in building secure, clean, and resilient energy future based on hydrogen. Australian Hydrogen Council members are from a range of sectors, including energy, transport, consulting, banking, and technology. Prior to join the Australian Hydrogen Council, Fiona worked for close to 20 years in the energy policy and regulation, specialized in energy retail competition and consumer protection matters. Fiona holds a Bachelor of Arts and a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Melbourne. She has published a well-regarded academic book on retail energy regulation in Australia. Dr. Fionn, please, your words.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andre, and thank you all for having me here today. So yeah, I will give a quick overview of the Australian Hydrogen Council and then go into some of my thoughts about what we're seeing in Australia with hydrogen and what some of the key issues that we still need to resolve. So as Andre has already said, the Australian Hydrogen Council is the peak body for the emerging clean and green hydrogen industry in Australia. Our objective is to have clean hydrogen as a key part of the energy mix. And the key part is at the very least for when things get difficult. We can use electricity and we can use batteries for so much in decarbonisation, and we absolutely should. Hydrogen can be used for a great deal to compete with electrification, but it must be used when you don't have more efficient alternatives. It's vital. We need it to run ships of the future, to make the green metals that we need for the future, to store energy also for supporting variable renewables. And when I say hydrogen, I should be clear, I also mean its derivatives, whether we're talking about ammonia or methanol, or as input even to sustainable aviation fuels. And of course, hydrogen is also a fundamental chemical input to key industrial processes. Nitrogen-based fertilizers feed or are responsible for something like half the world's population being in existence. So hydrogen has a very important role in food security as well as energy security. In terms of who we are at the council, we're 103 members at the moment, and yes, huge diversity in terms of where our members come from, again representing the diversity of the versatility of hydrogen and how it can be made, transported, stored and used. In terms of where we are as an industry in Australia at the moment, there's been enormous political support on both sides of politics and across all of our jurisdictions, so 8 states and territories and the federal government. The funding announcements come to over $1.5 billion Australian, and there's the over is because you end up with some murkiness. It doesn't have to be a hydrogen fund to benefit where we have manufacturing initiatives, jobs initiatives and the like. These are all ways that the emerging hydrogen industry can benefit from subsidies and funding mechanisms from government. And we believe that the experience to date has shown that you can draw through 3 to 4 times the amount of money from the private sector as that initial government subsidy. So we're looking at maybe about $6 billion worth of investment in Australia that is on the cards. It's likely to be there for the Australian hydrogen industry. However, that is probably some way away from where we need to be. So the cost of the energy transition overall globally is an enormous amount. For us in Australia, just to get hydrogen up, for the infrastructure as well as for the electrolyzers, for everything that we would need to do, including upgrades to ports and those sorts of things, we might be needing something more in the tens of billions of dollars. And my own back of the envelope assessment was more like 80 billion. So there's a bit to go there, and then a government percentage would be closer to 20. And certainly for Australia, as we look at our export intentions and our ambitions, there's the competing aspect of who are we competing with. And we look to, say, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and these are countries that are already putting in quite a bit of funding into their hydrogen ambitions. Within what we're talking about in Australia, there's actually some funding that's been put aside for hydrogen hubs. So these are the co-located use and production and use there's been 7 sites identified around the country. These were subject to they were announced prior to the election, There's also been some, as part of an official process to create hubs, there are also some pre-election commitments made by our previous government. So we're still waiting for those hubs to be sort of committed to publicly by the new government, but I have every reason to believe that we will see those occur as they were announced and give us something to look to as a way of both experimenting in real time with what works and getting some experience on the ground, as well as really seeing some meaningful efficiencies develop so that we can get the industry up. We've got some really great international relationships. So we're seeing particularly strong engagement within our region from Japan and South Korea, but we're also seeing strong engagement from Germany. The EU, obviously, they are confronting some questions around their energy security and are looking as far afield as Australia to make sure that they can get the diversity of energy supply. So it's been very interesting. There are delegations going back and forth between Europe and Australia, as well as within our region. And we're also seeing hydrogen increasingly being considered as a key part of a national security debate that's happening in our region. So that's a particularly interesting thing and one I would not have anticipated a few years ago. We've got 100 or so announced projects in Australia for hydrogen. I would strongly recommend, if you're interested in our projects and in any updates to them, there's a website called High Resource. It's HY Resource. That's hosted on by our scientific organisation, CSIRO, and the projects are all there. I highly recommend it. Of those projects that are on there at the moment, 19 are operating or under construction. We've got one completed pilot. There's a further 9 projects that are in advanced stage of development planning. And the projects that are listed on High Resource do cover the full spectrum of end-use activities. There's a focus at the moment on hydrogen mobility, so particularly sort of mining trucks and those sorts of and buses. We've got hydrogen blended into the natural gas networks, as well as industrial processes like ammonia production. Of the projects that are there, we still don't have many that have reached final investment decision, and none that are over 3 megawatts to my current knowledge. So we've got a way to go still to actually turn those projects from those announcements and into being absolutely on the books of the various businesses and start really getting to scale. There's been an enormous amount of work in the necessary cross-cutting pieces on how to have the industry evolve. And the first main one that I'll talk about is regulation. So there's been a lot of work on standards. Standards Australia is a not-for-profit national organisation that has been working closely with industry and governments to develop standards for hydrogen safety, in particular, and across all the different ways of engaging with hydrogen. There were 8 standards adopted in 2020 and very much more on the way. And we're very keen to have regulators sort of take on those standards and have them be put into regulations. There's a lot of work that's being done by our Australian government, our federal government, on mapping the legislation and the regulation, because of course hydrogen, because of its versatility, the great benefit of that also has a sort of more challenging part, which is how do you look at regulatory frameworks for a new fuel for which original legislation might not have considered. So our natural gas pipelines, for example, the regulations are talking about naturally occurring gases. You need to fix definitions. There's all this sort of work going on at the moment, as well as everything through to understanding, workplace health and safety, through to really unpacking all of those different touch points for regulation that hydrogen has relevance for. And what we found, and is the most useful approach because it's so complex, is to really start from a particular project. So project examples, and then say, all right, for a refueling station of this type, what are the things we need to understand? And that's been a way into a very complex area. The federal government's also been working on a guarantee of origin, which is the means of certifying the carbon emissions associated with hydrogen production. So enormously important. I will leave that definitely to Cameron to talk about in more depth. His organisation is the one doing some really good work in that space. In terms of how we're thinking about some of the big issues for Australia, there's this question about the inputs to how we make the hydrogen. And obviously, Australia is considered to be a logical place to make hydrogen, and it's something which we've all sort of embraced enormously, particularly in our region. And that's because of our ability to make large amounts of renewable electricity. We've got the land, we've got the solar irradiation, we've got the right sort of wind power and the co-location of those things in enough sites to really make Australia a terrific place to make hydrogen in the future at large scale. But we need to be thinking now, obviously, about, well, how much electricity is that? How do we construct? How do we engage with the construction activity of the future? So, for example, today, our national electricity market, which is just really on the eastern side of the country, has an installed capacity of nearly 60 gigawatts. It delivers approximately 180 terawatt hours of electricity to industry and homes per year. Our Australian energy market operator, AEMO, is saying that they've got a hydrogen scenario as a hydrogen superpower scenario. And to meet the requirements of the electricity for that scenario, they're actually saying we need to have 8 times the current energy delivery that we have. So that is, an enormous construction effort. So we need to be thinking about whether we, how do we access that land? How do we do so in a way which works with communities and doesn't alienate them? How do we demonstrate regional value and regional development, the jobs of the future? How do we access the workforce in an environment where that workforce is quite hard to get and is, we're all in competition for the same construction workers, particularly as different parts of our country and other countries as well have sort of building back post-COVID plans. So we're actually finding that our construction workers are at an enormous, there's a scarcity issue there. So how do we think about that? How do we plan for it into the future? How do we think about the water to make green hydrogen? So we're talking about the need to build desalination plants. How do we think about recycling? So these are some of the key issues that we're confronting and are doing so well, I think, but there's always, we can always do better. There's a sense of urgency there. It's a sort of patient urgency, isn't it? Because we need to be thinking about the next 20 and 30 years. So a lot of, the scale that we're talking about isn't tomorrow, but we definitely need to be taking the incremental steps today, next week, next year, in order to be in the right position in those decades' time. So I'll leave it there so we've got more time for discussion, and I look forward to answering any questions that people have. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for all this explanation and sharing this information. Brazil, Australia, there is a lot of in common, and I can see that there is a lot of things happening in Australia at this moment. So maybe one important topics that will be covered for our next panelists, Cameron, is regarding about the certification process. It will be necessary. So I would like to introduce Cameron. He's the manager of future carbon markets at the Clean Energy Regulator and leads implementation of Australia's Guarantee of Origin of Scheme. Cameron, could you please share your information with us?
Thanks, Andre. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yes, my name's Cameron Matthew. I'm from the Clean Energy Regulator. I'd like to talk to you, and Fiona's done a great segue for me to talking about certification of hydrogen in particular, but also the development in particular of the regulatory environment and the demand side kind of aspects that come from potential regulations that we build. Unlike the early finance and the investment in terms of capital, the regulations take longer, and that's what we're working on right now in the Australian government. I'll just share my presentation. It should come up in a minute. So I'd like to focus today a little bit on certification of hydrogen and the demand side, but I'll just take a little detour first into Australia's renewable energy and what's happened there and the role that certification has played. It's important to note Australia has a national hydrogen strategy that we set up in 2019, signed up by Australian state and territory governments and the federal government. This effectively lays out the pathway for developing and positioning our hydrogen industry as a major global player by 2030. There is a lot of, policy interventions, and in fact, that hydrogen strategy lists 57 actions that are now underway, and they span all parts of the regulatory and government policy sphere. Fiona's touched on a lot of those, including the importance in investing in projects and early startup projects, developing supply chains and investing in things like hubs and export facilities. That's on the supply side. In the centre, there's obviously a lot of work going on around the necessary safety regulations, industry regulations generally, at building the infrastructure that we need for a hydrogen industry. But what I really want to talk to you about today is facilitating hydrogen markets, and in particular, the certification of hydrogen to create value. Furthermore, on the demand side, regulation can also play a role, and we've already got some domestic activity in Australia starting to encourage the adoption of hydrogen and the switching away from kind of more polluting fuels. Finally, on the demand side, a key important aspect of certification is obviously access to international markets and demonstrating that the carbon emissions associated with the hydrogen are low enough for entry into that country. So I'll be focusing on these three red areas here. I'll take a little detour first because I've got an interesting story to tell about Australia's renewable energy industry, which has seen magnificent growth, particularly over the last 5 years. And central to this policy on certifying renewable electricity, we have a scheme called the Renewable Energy Target, and it effectively certifies all large-scale renewable electricity in the country. That target required Australia to kind of meet 20% renewable electricity from large-scale new sources by 2020. And that target continues flatlined all the way to 2030 and is encouraging and continues to encourage renewable energy investment. But underpinning that is a certificate called the Large Scale Generating Certificate, an LGC. That certificate has been in existence for the last 20 years, and the Clean Energy Regulator and its predecessors have been managing that market for certificates for the last 20 years. Now, the benefit of that certificate has been that it provides a nice, clear, transparent mechanism to show that you've purchased renewable electricity and there's a stable environment in which people can extract the value from that certificate. And so just showing you here what's on the chart, Australia's now seen 5 years in 2020, we're hopeful, 5 years of around 5 gigawatts added capacity, which on a per capita basis is very much at the top of the world in terms of investment, and we've stayed there for the past 5 years. Across the top, you can see our renewable energy penetration, not quite as pronounced as Brazil yet, but we're already up to 35% renewable electricity in the country by the end of this year, hopefully. And the Australian government has a plan effectively to get us to 82% by the end of 2030. Just to show you the effect, I suppose, from a markets perspective, I'm a markets kind of guy. The underpinning impact of the LGC is to provide a price signal for more investment. What I'm showing you here looks like a very complicated chart, but effectively the black line shows the large-scale generating certificate price being openly traded in Australia, which has sat at around about $40 for the past 3 or 4 years. Now, $40 is getting close to the levelized cost of electricity generation for solar power in Australia, to provide some comparison. So effectively, there's a very strong price signal, and and if you look at the chart here, it shows that the futures markets suggest that there will be a very long price signal for a very long time for renewable electricity certificates, and therefore the growth of the renewable electricity sector. And that's the kind of framework that we're thinking about when we think about hydrogen in Australia, is to have a certificate that allows people to extract the value from the green claims of the hydrogen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Guarantee of Origin scheme and how we can build those markets and create those certification schemes to create value. So Australia is planning to develop a Guarantee of Origin scheme with the purpose to build confidence in Australia's low emissions products to the world. We're going to start with hydrogen, and as Fiona said, we're going to expand to the hydrogen ecosystem over time to include products like ammonia, methanol, liquid hydrogen, and other opportunities to, effectively export fuels and carriers of hydrogen to the world. At the center of this is a certificate that would follow the product, and it would tell you information about the provenance of that product, where it came from, and it would tell you information about the emissions associated with it. This policy is still under development. It's not official government policy yet, and we're waiting for legislation to come through. But we are conducting trials at the moment and actively working with industry to build this scheme. Looking at the environment that we're in, we're working in 5 spaces at the moment in the Australian government. The Clean Energy Regulator is leading the trials, which I'll give you a bit of information at the moment, to start looking at emissions and certification of hydrogen. My colleagues in the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water are starting to work very closely, as Fiona suggested, with international partners, particularly in Asia and Europe, to work through what they need in terms of their hydrogen supply and the emissions story that they need with it. The Australian government's also working very closely with the International Partnership on Hydrogen in the Economy to establish methodologies to calculate the emissions associated with hydrogen. On the right-hand side of my chart here, we're also looking to build additional renewable electricity accounting rules and certification, and develop the legislation. We have a goal, and this is a goal that might be a stretch. As I said, regulation takes time, but we're looking to have a scheme up and running by the end of 2023 if we can get through the legislation established and the scheme up and running in that time. To give you a really brief story about what we're trying to do, we're trying to provide full supply chain traceability of emissions for hydrogen. This is a diagram that shows across the top the life cycle of hydrogen, from establishment of a facility, production of the hydrogen, right through to consumption and use. And we're trying to build a certificate that could tell you all of that information about every unit of hydrogen certified. Where has it come from? Is it from natural gas? Is it from coal gasification? Is it from renewable electricity? What are the emissions associated with the transport? I note that the methodologies for that are still under development internationally, but what is the emissions story and what is the story of provenance for the unit? And so that's what we're looking to build at the moment. And we're doing that firstly through a series of trials. And we're fortunate to have Luis on the call. Fortescue Future Industries is one of our participants in the trials. But we have a range of Australian hydrogen producers at very early stages of their development process that are working with us in a kind of co-design way to test those emissions accounting regimes and start to build an emissions accounting framework and a provenance chain story to provide that assurance to the world and to domestic consumers that the hydrogen is of the right green, low emissions or greenness, right? So obviously different countries we know are seeking different levels of hydrogen emissions intensity. So we're very much focused not on color, but we're very much focused on the emissions intensity story and where the hydrogen comes from. And by creating that environment, that will allow effectively countries to decide, what hydrogen they want and the consumer to make those decisions for themselves. As I said, we've got 20 companies. We're testing the various IPHE methodologies at the moment, and we've now completed our first phase around hydrogen. So we've effectively calculated some emissions intensities for a number of very small hydrogen activities, some of those early stages of activities in Australia already, and we're moving on to start testing hydrogen carriers and how do we calculate those transport and storage emissions associated with the hydrogen as well. Moving away from certification, the CER also administers a number of schemes that are there to encourage emissions reduction. And this is the kind of demand side support that should grow over time. The CER, the Clean Energy Regulator, administers two very interesting schemes that I'll just share with you briefly. Our safeguard mechanism. Safeguard mechanism actually caps industrial emissions in Australia and is now to effectively reduce those caps every year between now and 2030 and beyond, which will force particularly industrial sector emitters to switch as either to electrify or potentially use hydrogen as their source of industrial heat or their feedstock from an emissions perspective, particularly in the ammonia sector. So we have up to probably nearly 100 megatons of emissions that are covered under this regulation that would be potentially looking to switch to hydrogen in the future as those caps come down. The other activity the CER is doing is we're actually building a hydrogen use carbon credits method. This method will actually credit the switching from existing fossil fuels to hydrogen and provides a way of rewarding people who are taking action to switch early. We have an effective carbon price in Australia through our Australian Carbon Credit Unit and ACCU of $28 at the moment. So that's trading a fair bit below, say, the European markets at the moment, but it is still quite a substantial incentive to encourage people to switch and provide that price signal to show how you might be rewarded for switching to hydrogen. That method we're currently developing, we should have ready and out there by early 2023. That's as far as I wanted to go today. I'm very happy to jump into the conversation from here on out. There's a few websites there that you can access. The Guarantee of Origin site, go on there and have a look at our trial participants and what's happening there. And Australia's probably will give you a lot of information about all of the actions going on in Australia to support the hydrogen industry. Andre, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Thanks a lot for all this information that you're sharing with us. For sure, it's a good material for our discussion that we are going in a couple minutes, but now I want to invite Mr. Luis to join us. Luis is a country manager at Fortescue with responsibility for moving toward our green hydrogen plans in Brazil. He leads the strategy, internal market development, M&A, wind, solar, and hydrogen plants feasibility and execution and relationship with government and industry. Luis, please go ahead. I think Luis is in mute.
Sorry. Thanks. Sorry, I had a technical problem here. Thanks, Andre, for the introduction. Thank you, Agnes, Fiona, and Cameron for you covered very important topics and a very good discussion. So I feel embarrassed that I don't have much to share after all these things. You covered everything. So I'll try to be very, very fast and try to bring something to the table. Okay, my perspective as working for Fortescue Future Industries is more on the investor side, right, on developing these green hydrogen plants. But at first, I'm going to give you a little bit of information. Who is Fortescue, right? Fortescue is a company founded in 2003 in Australia. We started our business in mining ore, right, in West Australia. Since 2003, we have been very successful on our mining business, developing projects ahead of time with really operational excellence. And after 19 years, we are the fourth largest mining ore producer in the world. So it's a company that started with a big dream, and they were able to accomplish. 3 years ago, our chairman decided that we needed to do something about the road and help to decarbonize the road. And he and the executives of Fortescue fall in love with green hydrogen, right? And since then, we started with a company with 3 people, and now we are close to 1,000 people working in green hydrogen with projects all over the world. We are developing not only the production of a green hydrogen, but also all the technology around. We talk about ships, we talk about mining trucks. So we're all looking at green hydrogen and green ammonia usage as well, right? We work on technologies like the green steel and so on. So these are all the things that Fortescue is doing. Our ambitions are very large. We want to prevent the world from cooking, and we believe that green hydrogen it's a solution. And we announced around 15 million tons of green hydrogen produced by 2030, and more after that. So we are working in projects globally, and Brazil is one of them. Is a very important one, which we advanced a lot, right? We have been receiving here in Brazil a lot of support from the state government of Ceará and for our industry in Ceará, as well from the federal government. Agnes is a good friend and supporter. We also had the government as well looking at very seriously and trying to help and build this industry to flourish here in Brazil. I think Brazil has enormous advantages. We have a very, very sound and sophisticated renewable energy market here. It's one of the things, as Agnes mentioned, it's something that Brazilians should be proud of, right? Not long ago, we were 1 gigawatts of wind and solar. We are more than 30 gigawatts now, combined wind and solar. We have a energy matrix that's around 75% to 85% on the best years of renewable energy, hydro, solar, and wind. So there's a lot of experience here doing this. The government did a great job on connecting the Brazil with a national grid. So basically you can produce an energy in the south and deliver in the northeast or in the north. So we have a very robust system also that help us to go through challenging times as we had last year, like the worst drought in 95 years. We depend a lot on hydro, and we were able to go through it. In fact, with not big problem or not problem at all. So we have an electrical system that's very sound and very good. Energy also in terms of wind and solar, which is a big chunk of the cost of green hydrogen. They are world-class wind and solar profiles, energy production, and they also complement each other. We are blessed to have the sun during the day and the strongest wind at night in most of places. So it gives us an energy that can balance and give us base loads in a green hydrogen plant, which is very important. So we as Fortescue, right, we are very interested in Brazil. We announced a project in Ceará, right, in the port of Pecém. It's a port with the entire infrastructure for exporting. We're looking at exporting first to the exporting market because this is the first market that is requesting the green hydrogen. So they're looking at this product, and they are willing to buy. But we also look at Brazil with a huge potential, right? We are one of the largest consumers of fertilizers in the world. And for us, it's very important. The government did a good job also this well on developing a program to reduce the 85% imports of Brazil to around 45% by 2050. So fertilizers, it's going to be a big business, steel, mining, all these type of operations, as mentioned by my colleagues, are very important and very potential domestic customers. If you look at Brazil, so I spoke about the energy resources, I spoke about the port, the grid, and a lot of the differentials also is the determination of people here trying to promote this industry and trying to make it Brazil competitive. So if I look at as an example, the state of Ceará, right, and really kudos to them on what they developed. They learned what is green hydrogen very fast. 1 year ago, 1 year and a half ago, no one knew what was green hydrogen. Basically, they created a lot of symposiums. They did a lot of research globally, like Agnes showed also, like the federal government going. And this helped them to understand, and the federal government as well, understand what's the importance and what needs to be done in this industry. So this is a huge advantage when you have like government giving you support, understanding what is needed in the industry in order to help to develop. And this is in such a way similar to what was wind and solar that I mentioned. 1 gigawatt to 30 gigawatts was probably a little bit more than 10 years ago. It's the government looking at how can I partnership with the private initiative, right? And help to develop, to start the industry and then let the industry flourish and grow by itself. So we have a successful business case, and I'm pretty much excited on the hydrogen plant of Brazil also to repeat that success that we had on renewables. I think that in terms of Brazil, that's basically it. Like we are excited, we are happy to be here. We think that the country has huge potential to be a big player of green hydrogen in the world, domestically and also on export. And we are the first ones to sign a contract of land in the Pecém airport, the Pecém port for industrial, for large-scale green hydrogens. We are now going through the feasibility studies, doing all the studies to make sure that the project is viable. But the signs that we're receiving, the information that we have so far, Brazil is pretty much a big contender to be play a big role for Fortescue future industry. So thank you, André.
Thank you, Luis. Congratulations for your pioneers. And with your words, we finished the first block. That was the initial consideration from all the panelists. And now we are starting a second block that is mainly the Q&A. I have some questions, and also there is 2 questions from our audience, so I will pick up some questions from the audience and others I will do by myself. So let me start looking for the audience. So I think this one is maybe more for Ada. Agnes, there is a question from Ieda Gomes. I will read to you. Is in the early stage of the green hydrogen economy, it's critical to have government support for demonstration and export projects. How far the Brazilian government can go in provide such support and learning from other countries such as Chile or Australia, as we see in this presentation?
Thank you for the question, Ieda. I think this is what we will discuss in the coming months. When I mentioned the structure of our program, there is a specific thematic chamber that is led by the Ministry of Economics. And when we talk about sports and public resources and subsidies, it's not something that it's easy here in Brazil, everybody knows this. But on the other hand, what we already know is that there is support in smaller scale pilot phases, as Fiona mentioned. But for demonstration and export projects and bigger projects, then I think it's maybe a step ahead still. But it's not that it is excluded from our vision, but it's something that we have to design, I think, in this comprehensive way, so that we ensure that our scarce resources are directed for promising projects, I think.
Okay, thank you, Agnes. And now I want to ask, I think maybe Fiona or Cameron also can help us here. But my question is, what incentives are most effective in generation marketing demand for green hydrogen? Is it a carbon taxation? What is your opinion about this?
I think that, so thank you for the question. We're still trying to work that out. Valuing carbon in some way definitely is the answer, because why else would an incumbent industry do anything different? Why would we ever switch from fossil fuels if there wasn't a means for the economy to value that cost of carbon and that benefit of zero, low to zero carbon alternatives? But I think that there continues to be really sort of useful debate around the form of that carbon pricing. Certainly in Australia, an economy-wide carbon price appears to be off the table. We've tried that a couple of times, and it was portrayed politically as a carbon tax that was very unpopular. We have also had some years of a federal government that was not keen to talk about climate change or its impact on the economy. But with the change in government that we've had recently, we've seen this fabulous renewed effort in making up for some lost time and in making these commitments to a lower emissions future. And so we're starting to have those policy conversations again, which is great. I think Cameron's probably going to be, well, I know Cameron's going to be a much greater expert than me in terms of particular mechanisms. For me, yeah, I'm looking at the mechanisms but thinking it still has to be, it's not just about the mechanism, it's about the targeting of something. It's about the level at which you value the carbon. As he's already mentioned, Cameron was saying our ACCU's at a certain price, but ideally we're valuing carbon somewhere higher. Obviously, the challenge we all have, though, is pursuing a solely environmental perspective, which is urgent and important for us to be doing everything we can. Still means that you can run head on into other economic and industrial relations issues. How do we actually do the transition itself? Because a lot of people sort of think that the carbon price needs to be set, as if we could click our fingers and be in the green future tomorrow. That question around where do you set the prices, the cost of carbon, for it to be high enough to make things happen, but not so high that you're killing in industries and hiking up end consumer costs. So I think we're still trying to work that out still, and it becomes a difficult political negotiation.
Yeah, I might just jump in, Andre. Fiona, that's right. That judgment. Australia's got a very long history with carbon pricing and carbon regulation. I outlined some of the kind of I suppose poolside factors that we have in place now, including, as Fiona says, a way of valuing that emissions reduction. One of the interesting aspects, I think, in an Australian context, and maybe this is global as well, is the ambition of corporations to probably move ahead of government as well. So what we've been seeing in the renewable energy sector, and likely in hydrogen too, is that corporations will want to meet their own corporate targets, to meet their own shareholder and stakeholder interests as well. And that's what we certainly see in our carbon credit market and our renewable energy certificate market, where corporations are actually driving that price and valuing that carbon much more highly than would otherwise be the case, I suppose. So, you know, there is a role for government just to facilitate that voluntary ambition as well, because there are many corporations in Australia that want to move very quickly to net zero or very low emissions activities by 2030 in particular.
Okay. Thank you, Fiona and Cameron. We have more questions here. One of them are regarding to opportunities exportation for Europe and Asia. But the key point is certification. Brazil, for example, our grid is mainly from renewable. We have 85% of the energy comes from renewable, but we are not sure if you can use the grid energy and export this for premium markets like Europe. The question is how Brazil and Australia, or how both countries can provide certification for green hydrogen. What kind of cooperation do you think that is possible to establish for an international understanding of this clean hydrogen?
And this is a very interesting discussion. We have been participating in several international forums discussing how to certificate green or renewable or low carbon hydrogen. But in fact, being more pragmatic, we are also contributing through our energy research office in these international initiatives, like the German auction for hydrogen, the public consultation that they are proposing, so that what we think is that demand side will set the needs and what they want, and where we can. What we are doing now is trying to inform how reasonable these standards are or not. For example, one of the things that we were discussing is like, if the project is connected to the grid, you have to be able to prove that it's the production and the consumption occur at the same instant. So, okay, this is something that we might be able to prove, but how does this help a market to be developed, or why aren't there other ways for somebody to which is exporting? For example, dealing with mixes of hydrogen. Maybe you cannot guarantee that 100% of your hydrogen is from renewable, but 85%, because 85% of the mix is renewable, and then you can compete with a mix from somewhere else, and then you say, okay, now I can attend to your levels of requirements. In fact, so these are the things that we are discussing right now. But on the other hand, when we know that we have also a lot to learn with other countries, like here, Australia, that has gone more deeply into this discussion internally because of these renewable energy certificates that they already have and their experience that they have. In Brazil, we have also renewable energy certificates, but they are really voluntary. And this is something that we are now starting to organize or to help to promote in the power sector in Brazil. So maybe we get some benchmarks and good ideas. But at the end, I think that the ones who will set the requirements are really the demanding market. So this is how we can start to discuss and with them, I think.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you very much. Luis? please.
Maybe just to add to Agnes, right? Advantage of Fortescue, because we are looking at all over the world, right? We know exactly what's going on in Australia, in Brazil, in Africa, in Europe, in the US. So we are getting a lot of knowledge, right? Yeah, the question is very good. Like we understand, we see that different markets they are classifying green hydrogen in different ways. There are organizations that are working with the European Union, for example, to try to come up with reasonable requirements. Some of the requirements may be attended, but they also are going to increase the price of the product. In the end, we want to have a green product and competitive as well, right? So we try to bring this knowledge that we gather all over the world to the entities in Brazil or in Australia and so on, right? Brazil has been participating and doing a great job. In fact, with the Ministério de Minas e Energia, it's the energy minister. Like as Agnes was mentioned, there were a lot of comments from the Brazilian team here in Brazil, like to Europe about the issues in Australia as well. They also participated in Congress in Barcelona, talking with the Green Hydrogen Organization. That was one of the slides of Agnes, right? So there's a lot of Brazilians being very active in order to try to put their point of views and protect this market in order to avoid any protectionism of any sort.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you very much. And I have a question to you also. Fortescue is one of the companies that are leading the growing of hydrogen market in Brazil. When you are the pioneer, there is a lot of risk, market risk, completion from EPC risks, logistic risk, all of this. But of course, that to be leading the process, there is some advantage. What is the pros to be one of the pioneers in green hydrogen industry in Brazil?
I think, sorry, what's the name of the person that made the question again?
Andrea, the moderator here.
Andrea, okay,
it's
Andrea.
My question.
Okay.
It's my question.
Because, no, that's a great question. So, no, I think, Andrea, you touch in a very crucial point that is like the cost of being the first mover, right? And the cost of being the first mover, like all the lessons learned and all the efficiencies are going to be paid by the first movers. And then this is going to be adopted in more scale, right? After things start to go well. So Fortescue, we are up to the challenge, right? We think that in some ways we need the industry needs some help, like it was done with the renewables, wind and solar, just for a kickoff, right? So we need to look at which kind of efficiency and which kind of improvements to reduce the cost of the first mover. I think that's an important thing for you to develop an industry, thinking that you could be the leader globally. So that is my first point. We need to look at that in detail and look at the security of the investment that are investments for 20, 30 years, and how we bring these out of the paper. So this is the first one. The second one of being the first mover, let's say the pros on this is that first is very exciting, right? So
for sure.
We are learning every day. As I said, like 1.5 years ago, the knowledge was very minimal, and we are learning and doing things that no one did before. So this is very exciting. Everybody's happy to do this. So the motivation, the goal of decarbonizing the world and helping avoid the plan of cooking. So protect for the planet for future generations is something very compelling to all of us. So this is crucial. In terms of us being the first movers, in terms of advantages, we're starting the market, right? So we are looking at we're doing all this. I don't know if I can call a big advantage, but I guess that we are receiving a lot of things because we are the first ones, and because we are putting a lot of investment on this. we are having the chance of the big companies that really interested in investing in green hydrogen in the world and the governments. They're coming to us for listen for skill, listen and understanding how they can participate and develop the market, right? So I think this is the big advantage for us. In this process, we also learn. We learn from the other side what are the challenges and so on that we discuss, and help to innovate and make this industry viable. So that's probably the biggest advantage of being a first mover like Fortescue.
Thank you, Luis, for your answer, and congratulations for this initiative. Now I will pick up one question from the audience. I think there is two questions related to green ammonia. One of them is in Portuguese. I will read in Portuguese, and after that I can translate. But is a question from Augusto. Gostaria de saber como está o horizonte de aplicação do hidrogênio verde como combustível naval, haja vista a autonomia de embarcações do transporte internacional. The main question from Augusto is regarding to green ammonia to attend the IMO decarbonization process, but regarding the autonomy, the safety. Who wants to discuss a little bit about this? Who feels more comfortable to answer this question?
If I can help, right? Because we're looking at to the question, we are looking at producing on green ammonia. That's in the end, it's going to be the carrier for green hydrogen at the moment, because you do not have a shipping industry of green hydrogen that's minus 230 C to transport, and ammonia can be transported everywhere in the world. It's already known technology at minus 30, right? So most of these projects that are going to be for export, or all of them, are going to be transporting ammonia at first, and then a conversion to hopefully one day we are going to remove the ammonia, or use ammonia for fertilizers only, and use only the green hydrogen. That will also help to reduce the cost, the final cost of the energy to the final user. In terms of vessels, Fortescue is working in a vessel with ammonia, not with hydrogen, but ships. We are doing studies. In fact, we have one engine already doing the studies with using green ammonia, and there are a lot of other projects in the world, because ammonia is a big contender to be the future for ships all over the world in the future. So especially green ammonia to reduce and decarbonize that industry.
Okay, it's a good point. Also, there is a lot of discussion about green methanol, for example. If you have a CO2 source, you can react with hydrogen and also produce methanol. There is a lot of discussion on how to decarbonize the national maritime transportation. So we have more 5 minutes. I think maybe we have more time for one question. There is one specifically to Agnes. What economic advantage can green hydrogen bring to the Brazilian fertilizer industry producers? So Brazil is a very important agricultural producer. We import most of our fertilizer, and the question is, can we use green hydrogen to boost the fertilizer industry in Brazil, Agnes?
Yes, I think so. And yes, as you mentioned, I think one of the effects is reducing imports, which is something very important, and reducing the carbon footprint of the fertilizers at the end in Brazil. So this is something very promising. And when we think about the not lower hanging fruits, this is one of them, because there is already a promising market for this in Brazil. As you mentioned, we are really a country that has a strong agricultural business.
Okay, thank you, Agnes. Yes, it's a good opportunity. And the question is how open the market will be for green fertilizer products. It's something that with the time we'll learn also how this marketing works. So, there is some question. Well, there is a lot of questions. Sorry, we don't have time to cover all of these questions in the audience. I think, let me see. Tulio are asking just to have an idea about the average cost of production of green hydrogen in the Australian. I don't know, Fiona or maybe Cameron, could you please answer this question?
The average cost of green hydrogen.
Yeah.
That's a reasonably tricky one. I think it's somewhere between sort of $6 and $16, I would expect, depending on how you make it. And in the end, obviously, the cost matters, but the price of what you're competing with is more important fundamentally to then understand how. It's as important to then understand how hydrogen actually can compete. Cameron, do you have more to add on that?
Fiona, just to add that the green hydrogen projects, hydrogen from electrolysis and renewables, they're all very early development stage. So they're not commercial activities at the moment. They're all funded and broadly research projects at the moment. So the cost of hydrogen is obviously very high. The next wave of commercial projects where we'll get some real information is probably happening in the next maybe 2 to 3 years, where you might actually start to see some projects at scale that give you a better feel for it. But other than that, I don't have much to add there, Fiona.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you a lot. Well, we are almost on the time. I would like to say thank you for CEBRI to invite me to moderate. It was a pleasure. And I appreciate a lot all the information that all the panelists share with us. I'd like to say thank you for the audience also. It's almost 30 minutes past 8 p.m. in Brazil, so some people are still with us participating and put some question in the Q&A. And I would like to invite Jorge Camargo to make his final consideration to close our excellent discussion here.
No, Andrea, thank you very much. I just want to add my thanks to yours. I think we had an excellent event. To thank our excellent panelists. I think they did fantastic presentations, excellent contributions. For my side, I believe that the audience who shared with me, I think we are even more convinced of the potential of the greatness of this new market that hydrogen represents for Brazil and Australia, and not only for the planet. You know, that's something that's very important. I was very pleased to hear how engaged are both governments, Agnes and Fiona and Cameron, from explaining how, and it is really very important for governments to set the vision, not necessarily to lock into routes, but at least to show a vision of the future, take into account the singularities of the different countries and the different situations. Fiona, I think she said about the diversity of hydrogen. And that's really a very diverse and complex space that we are entering now. And so what we have to do is really to set the scene and to establish the regulations, certifications, incentives, so that we can transform this vision of the potential of this energy into reality. I was in some aspects more with more questions than answers, because you're just starting this process. One thing that was very interesting, I was still thinking here, is that about the pricing of carbon, and how can we incentivize to pricing hydrogen. So this is a key question. I think that you all mentioned somehow that we have to address that. This transition of energy, unless the previous transitions that you have moved from one form of energy to a more efficient form of energy. Now, in other words, the transition was driven by efficiency. This one is driven by climate. It's a completely different world. So hydrogen is not more efficient than direct electricity. but it has the price of carbon has to be taken into account. So it's also about how can we, let's say, make something politically acceptable way for people to understand that we need to put some price on carbon. And unless we do that, I believe that this transition will take much longer, and perhaps we don't have enough time to take. So we have to have some kind of bold and strong political leadership that we can address this issue. But I'm talking too much. I just want to. It's late in the night here in Brazil. Thank you very much, André, for conducting this, to moderating this session. Thank you, Agnes, Fiona, Cameron, Luis, for excellent presentations. Thanks for the audience. It's really a pleasure and an honor for CEBRI, together with the Australian Embassy, to have produced this event. Thank you very much, and good evening, good morning to all.
Good evening. Good morning.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.